Okay, I think we are starting. I should be live. Do let me know if you can hear me. Let's do a sound check as per usual. If you can see me, ping something in the chat. Let me know how you're doing. Where are you watching this from? Who are you? Say hello. Just so I know that I'm not waffling to myself in the background and none of this is actually live. Oh, I got something cool from New Jersey. Adriana, I remember from a previous stream. Welcome back from Ottawa. Dude, guy, man. Cool. Awesome. So we're actually rolling. Okay, let's jump right into it. I see people are actually joining as I'm starting to waffle. Hey, Rich, Kevin as well. I see familiar faces. But today is really going to be me. I guess I really want to avoid ranting about this subject. I really want to keep it constructive and still quite critical because there are so many lessons we can learn from the emerging tech, in particular the LLM, LAM, a lot of the different generative model, AI model type of technologies which just came out. And there's so many more to come, by the way, and I'm going to explain exactly why. Obviously, I'm not just going to give you my thoughts and just waffle. I'm going to show you something too, because it's going to be easier, I think, to have a discussion, if anything, because I can share my thoughts, you can share your comments back, and then we kind of learn and maybe gain perspective, if anything, because it's less about opinions or what does X person think. Doesn't matter who they are. It's really about joint input of signals so that you can make better decisions going forward, because it's not the last one. You know, those devices, some could argue they're version ones. Some could argue they're going to be, I don't know, version zeros, whatever. It's going to more to come. It's definitely more to come. That's for sure. Cool. I see another other couple of people from France. Hello there. Let me jump into the agenda so you know exactly what this is going to be about. As per usual, I have a few points I want to share, but it's also going to be a lot of anecdotes and examples from the field, because you know it's one way to, I guess it's one approach is really to reflect of what's been happening from the feedback and just tell me again my opinion, but I also want to share the actual user feedback in a very unstructured way so that you know it's better to frame things. There's also going to be a few bits specifically on the Rabbit R1, which everybody's seen, I think, by now. Humane AI Pin 2. I have a lot of excerpts just to guide my thoughts or what I wanted to discuss. But it's going to kind of, I think, build up this bigger landscape of signals. Cool. All right. So let's jump right into it. I think, you know, you're not stranger to this, right? Like to this topic. I think you might seen some of these signals back in the day and likely got excited like I did as well. I think when I saw like Rabbit R1 or anything from Teenage Engineering, like design-wise, like form-wise, it was mind-blowing because it looks good. But we also have other devices which are questionable, which nobody really talks about. And caveat here, I think Rabbit R1 is going to be one of those. I think after R2, R3, or other animals of sorts are going to come up, I think this design kind of goes into the shadow. But on that in a minute. Why I want to start with this is because there is always two divisive camps. And of course, majority of the people don't really care about this, especially when it comes to consumers. It doesn't matter if you're a UXer or techie or product manager. You probably are a bit more informed, but majority of the people are just not going to care until majority of other people we know have it already in their pockets. And that's what happens with, you know, iPhone and any other kind of like disruptive type of engagement or interaction, hardware plus software solutions. But I think the two camps, just to come back to that, where that people either immediately said that this is a winner because it looks so good, it looks like a candy, or is going to be a loser because it breaks a lot of those UX. I wouldn't even say laws. There is obviously some of those laws defined, but it's more of like ergonomics, human factors, just simple human-computer interaction guidelines, heuristics, usability elements, which just don't really fit. And that's why I always had like a very skeptical mindset. And I think, if anything, the biggest lesson here, that there is a lot of critical thinking lessons in this involved, because it doesn't matter how good the things look like, there's always more to that story. And I think this is one of those. And to continue, I think one of the things of why this is happening, because you might notice that there is a bit of a boom, but it's actually a very small boom, to be honest. I think I'm lacking the picture of actual stats of how much of a VC funding is being spent on AI comparatively with other tech, specifically when it comes to grouping, because AI could be anything. It doesn't have to be LLMs. It doesn't have to be language learning models. It could be machine learning models based on advanced statistics and analytics. There could be, custom models made for it. It doesn't have to be just language based. So it's very hard to tell exactly how much of that care, or how much the VCs care about, let's say, the types of devices which are disruptive, like Rabbit R1 or Humane Pin or Humane AI Pin. But clearly there is a boom, because they raised quite a lot of dough, but on that in a sec. Before we jump into that, what I want to highlight, I think, which is very interesting, is that this is actually from last year, by the way, but I think it's indicative of what we're dealing today, because, the themes don't really change that quick. You still kind of deal with the same elements here and there, but ultimately, because of the market conditions, because of all the different factors which about, you might have been witnessing layoffs, but if you go upstream from that, you're going to realize exactly of where does it originate, and it usually comes down to finances and market and social economical elements and a lot of other factors. A lot of the disruptions would happen, but funnily enough, if you look at the data, a lot of the investment, or at least considerable amount of investment, has been done into the early stage or disruptive AI. And Rabbit R1 and Humane AI Pin are just a couple of those. There's a lot more, and there is just a bigger range of even solutions which people don't talk about. One of the things which I wanted to bring up, which might be interesting, is that Rabbit R1 isn't new. Like the company itself, Rabbit Inc., I think they're called. They've been around for several years, and so have the Humane AI folk. So we've been actually building this up. This snapshot just shows last year, but we obviously tried to raise money throughout the years until we got it and until we could roll this out. It's really big effort. It's not something we just clicked with fingers and rolled out. I think it's been obviously a tough year, especially if you've been working with, startups, and the technology elements and how hard for people is to raise the dough, so to speak. But having a keyword AI or generative AI or something along those lines is actually putting you up on the list. Before that, it was crypto, Web3, decentralized tech, and you name it, VR, AR, spatial experiences probably is going to be in the middle. But if you have AI, it obviously bounces you up, because that's a keyword. That's a keyword that investors are looking for. And obviously, there's a lot of cash flow to support these things. And I think why I want to give you this information before we jump into it, because it's going to enable you to think more critically, I think, knowing that, if you put more wood into the fire, it's just going to burn. And then you're not going to be able to control it. And I think that's a bit of what's happening with these solutions, because they are polished on one end, but they're really, really lacking on the other end. And I think money really corrupts a lot of that solution, a lot of that experience design when it comes to these solutions. And I think that's why, for example, if you look at Rabbit Inc., this is an actual screenshot. By the way, there's going to be a lot of cutouts. I think it's going to illustrate it pretty well. Rabbit raised 10 million to launch first AR hardware, right? That's nothing, especially for hardware. They obviously had other fundraisings. There is a lot of other like pre-seed, I think, and seed campaigns we did basically to raise the money. So it's been quite some time, and they obviously had a lot of rounds to talk to investors to raise it. But that's just, I wanted for you to know that, to compare of what Humane raised. because it's almost like a night and day. Both have hardware, both have software, both design some sort of UX, but they have, different amount of money to play with and different timeframes too, which I'm gonna get back to. Humane, as you know, or as you heard maybe, or maybe not, raised 200 million. And that's from obviously Sam Altman, who was one of those. There's obviously more money, more investors. I think Humane had 5 or around 4 rounds. Like there was pre-seed, seed, and a lot of other series basically. From A, I think maybe we're now in B or C. I don't even know. It's just been that many. I think I have it somewhere. But my point is that they basically raised a lot of money, and their vision arguably could seem bigger because we have a lot of the projections, we have a lot of the spatial awareness and experiences. They're a much more smaller device. Obviously, you could argue that they play with different constraints than Rabbit R1. But what unifies the two, after the differences, is I think this headline, which is basically saying that startups are racing to create the iPhone of AI. And I think this notion has been prevalent for so long. I think when iPad came out, which, it's still a question, why do we even need it besides a glorified machine to view YouTube? You can challenge me on that, obviously, but I have my own opinions. There's obviously other, let's say, Apple devices, but they haven't been as disruptive as, let's say, iPhone has been to mobile technology, but also how consumers interact, how we do work as well. Like every other innovation is really piggybacking on there. And obviously, Samsung had their cases, and a lot of other Android makers have their a lot of they built up the shoulders for the giant Apple to make it better or to clean it up a bit. But since then, a lot of the VCs in a lot of different fields, especially when it comes to consumer technology, have been looking to reinvent the technology, to produce something groundbreaking, which could kind of pave the way for them to, I don't know, for the next decade at a minimum, to have a good cash flow or to just make enough to retire, on an individual level. So the vision has been that, right? Let's challenge the phone. Let's basically, for customers or consumers like you and me, let's provide with something else which would support it. And I think I'm gonna, I'm gonna kind of take on a lot of the presumptions here. Again, I have no idea what happened behind the scenes. If you know anything, leave in a comment, by the way. And as I go, by the way, please comment. It's gonna help me to enrich this and have a bit more of a back and forth with you viewing than just me waffling. But I believe both of the companies have the same vision and mission and the iterative steps they wanted to take to go to the market. And that has been always not to immediately replace the iPhone, and that's a good thing, by the way, but to incrementally introduce something which would be almost like a companion device and then go forward. And I think AI Pin is definitely a companion device. It's like you couldn't do anything with it. I'm going to show some demos, but you couldn't do much with it. With Rabbit, you could argue you could replace it, but even then, to set up Rabbit, you have to use another portal, applets and things of that nature to kind of for it to work. And both are different. Obviously, a lot of it is marketing. One is LAM, which is learning action models, I think we call it, and LLM is obviously the language learning models. But they both basically, I think, Humane AI Pin is more innovative on the interaction design perspective, or how like the human would interact with the actual device to go by their day and complete their tasks. Meanwhile, the Rabbit is more about the actual replacement of a screen and just almost going away from the typical experiences where users would log into something and then kind of be so pigeonholed within the app. It's almost like they, in my head, wanted to open it up as much as possible. And I think even one of the slogans has been, let's just bin all the apps. And I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but they said basically, let's figure out something which we wouldn't even need the apps in the end. But obviously, long time, like long way to get there. It's just been so it's been a few different bits which I'm gonna cover. By the way, I don't want to like jump forward too quick ahead because there is a lot to cover here. By the way, and I want to get this in like an hour. So do let me know your thoughts by the way as I go through this. Do challenge me as well because this is my take, my perspectives. You probably are gonna have. I think one of the things which I interestingly bookmarked back in the day was this, and this is trustedreviews.com. This is where I believe, you could challenge me again. A lot of the people who are, let's say, less of the makers, and when I say makers, it's designers, developers, techies, would go for to look at what is what and why should we buy into it or should we consider, or even if their neighbor made a good decision buying it. And I think it summarizes a few things. Obviously, this is very ill-informed. It's something, if I would write a review of this, I might kind of tell you similar stuff, but it highlights a lot of those things which, how would, let's say, a person, your neighbor, would look at this device and how would they think about that? And what sort of like comparison would they have? And this is basically to show you how 90% of the people out there would think about this. And it's very simplistic. Just looking at the headlines. The Rabbit R1 interactive apps on your behalf. Boom. That's, you don't have to go into it. Tells the story. The Humane AI Pin turns your palm into the screen. Super. Let me close that down. The Humane AI Pin can summarize conversations. And then the last one, the Rabbit R1 is significantly cheaper. That's it. This is about it. If you would go to talk to a person who might just heard about it, this is how they probably would summarize it. And this is how consumers obviously went into it. Obviously, consumers didn't adopt it immediately. There were techies on Twitter or other social network who shared it, who already have enough skin in the game to be excited about it, especially if they're excited about their jobs and AI in general. But it's interesting how, let's say, people, mom and pops, your neighbor, maybe let me know by the way if you're seeing me smoothly, because I'm getting an error from YouTube. Just don't want it to break down. I think maybe it's because of the streaming of the browser. By the way, from Nayam or Najam, by the way, there are AI chips, Grok, so HW will be getting better to support better interfaces and so on. Yeah, if you think about the hardware, for sure, but this is a snapshot in today's, in today's world, right? Like it's way too early, and I think you're having the same sentiment as you're commenting that. Anyhow, I wanted to just tell you this as a background. Now, I think this article, by the way, summarizes it pretty well of the challenges. And this is not written by a designer, but sometimes and often, and if you see from a regular person or someone who, let's say, is a tech reviewer, making a lot of UX sense, there's a lot in it, because chances are a lot of other people think the same way. And this is, again, a screenshot, so you can go and read up that article. It's very simple. I really just wanted to extract this because it's going to tell you a bigger story than I could even. Adoption challenges and kind of purely UX issues. And this is Humane AI Pin, by the way. It's not Rabbit, but you can put it all together in one bucket because consumers, again, don't care. They have no idea what is what, or they shouldn't even, because there is very, very small legs on these two solutions. But the 5 reasons of why the adoption of them would be challenged today, in this very day, is the immaturity of the technology. This is inarguable. If you've seen demos, and I'm going to show a couple of the delays, the feedback or lack of a feedback, or even focusing or over-focusing on the feedback instead of affordances is a massive issue. The feasibility of it, and also thinking about the pricing itself, of how you would sustain those experiences, like from Rabbit R1, which is just one-off payment and a very minimal at that. Poor variability, again, massive. This is UX part, right, as well, because you need to basically, again, and this is about the pin, right? But you need to have certain, you need to wear certain things to be able to pull it off, not from fashion sense, but from very logistical sense. You also probably need to consider if it's hidden or like at what angle and things of that nature. There's obviously a lot in it, and they obviously tested it, but this is ergonomics and this is human factors. It's how the actual humans would use a newly built device. And I think maybe someone said the same when they saw, a portable phone back in the day. But you could even also argue that there are other types of phones and other increments and generations of the technology before it went out. Three, previous experience, which is voice assistants such as Alexa, Google Home are already on the market, but their impact has remained confined to a niche audience. And I think this is one of those things because that previous technology was very different, but also very, very similar to what the Rabbit R1 is like. It's just that the hardware, it's just basically that they were supported with a purpose-built hardware instead of just being integrated within a phone. I think everybody had experience by now with Alexa, Google Assistant. I don't know what it's called anymore because I haven't tried it in so long. And it's telling as well, right? The Siri and a lot of other assistants and some more known, some less known. But your expectations are built up upon that too. And anything which requires hardware, which is super difficult as it is, plus taps into that existing interaction methods and technology and the expectations from the behavior side, informs the attitudes from the consumer. You always want to make it better. And it isn't. That's one of the things. You might have seen the demos, which again, I'm going to come to. But looking at the actual demos, you almost like the phone-based Siri or Google Assistant is quicker. Granted, maybe more limited, maybe less fancy, less things to gather, less generative AI. Models are not being engaged and less data being processed and fed back, from cloud or to a cloud. But there is massive delays, and delays always mean bad design. It's just a heuristic you cannot go through. There has to be, even if in a feedback giving a loader or telling that it's going to take a few minutes, is way too long, especially for the simplest of tasks, for it to be desirable. Complexity and trustiness. This is another one. It will be possible to customize our experience with the AI pin via humane.center, and a hub, blah, 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 blah. Same as Rabbit R1. You almost have to do an extra step to onboard yourself. And there are even demos of Rabbit R1. Again, I'm kind of jumping ahead a bit, but I think it's important, where people basically are told no by device because they're just not set up. And if a device, even if my, let's say, a smartwatch, whatever, tells me, hey, you have to download an app or you have to use something else for me to work, this is a big ask. It's probably one of the biggest asks which you need to design for very, very carefully. And, you could argue that it's the only way to do so today, but in that case, it just isn't ready for the market. It's still at that kind of like a proof of concept state or MVP state. Again, challenge me. Let me just have another sip. Sorry for the slurps, if they're audible. The laser ink doesn't seem like a viable option, especially for the price of the AI pin. Many will turn to R1 because of that. Yeah, but I would even, Delphine, good point, but I would even challenge you that many are going to turn down Rabbit R1 as well. Because, again, they're very similar in terms of a value add or proof of value for the user. It's too big of a want for someone to adopt it. It's same way as, again, maybe example is going to be far-fetched, but iPads. a lot of the people have iPads, but in my very limited experience, but also observations and cumulative anecdotes and things of that nature, it's very clear that to adopt it for actual work, a person has to want it so bad that they're gonna force themselves to create habits to practice it and use it because the interaction is so limiting. And this is kind of like a miles away from Rabbit or One complexity or Humane AI Pin, sorry, complexity. It's too foreign, it's too alien. It seems like it's very demanding of the users to adopt it. It's asking for way too much, in my view. And from Kevin about Alexa. And Alexa and others are used generally in homes where a certain level of privacy exists, not the case of these devices, not to mention the issue of data collection and privacy. That's true, Kevin, but also, to challenge you a bit, I think both of them are coming with privacy first. I don't know how much of it is marketing, but at least on their websites, or at least one of those value adds, quote unquote, features, they are stating that the privacy and data security is utmost priority. That's like a number one thing, basically. I think both of them, at least Rabbit, are one, if I remember. So at least they're communicating it, that we care about it. I don't know how much, to what extent. I think you are right in a way that it's less private from physical perspective or hardware usage perspective, because you have to use it in the open. You have no privacy of eyes or ears. You kind of, you have to use your voice. Where you could argue then there's issues of accessibility and everything along those lines. But I think, it's, again, different beast. It's not a phone which, you can tap things and nobody sees it. Like, from that perspective, there's no eavesdropping from very physical perspective. From the software perspective, you could argue, but again, they're marketing it in the right light. I don't know if in the right way, from a doing perspective. And yeah, you mean from talking in a public to a device. Yeah, exactly. That's where I'm like, that eavesdropping thing, that the privacy is a bit redundant when you're talking to a device, like to a person, because anyone can listen or anyone can hear or even see the responses, especially if they're laser projected. I'm going to jump ahead a bit. I'm going to try to come back to the questions. If we don't add them in again, I might just come back to that. Complexity and trustworthiness, I think we covered that. It's a hub. It's asking for a person to do extra steps to onboard themselves. Big one. The lesser the friction, or the more guided, at least, even if it's full of friction, the better, right? Like, you always want to smoothen the journey so that people are guided and they can self-serve and on board. Challenge to the habits, big one, and massive habits and massive massive UX issue from adoption perspective and behaviors perspective, because this is stating most of the daily activities performed with a smartphone happen quietly and privately, what Kevin just highlighted and we talked about, down on our screens, yada, yada, yada. The creators of the AI pin, on the other hand, invite us to think out loud our commands, and significant change that could prove to be a difficult barrier. Yeah, so this is immediately disqualifies the device from work environments, from social environments. It's really made by techies who work in isolation for other techies who work in isolation. And I know I'm putting it frankly and blunt, but I think that's what it is right now. There has to be almost like a very fundamental paradigm shift of them realizing that their privacy of the interaction of their device matters a lot. And more so, it's like, even if you park that notion, I think another thing is having yet another device to charge and having yet another device to talk to, be it by typing vocally or with some sort of other inputs and outputs, through those exchanges. But it's yet another device to take care of and familiarize and adopt and basically learn to use. Again, the steps are countless. A lot of people are going to say it was the same with a phone and things of that nature, but you didn't have alternatives. And now you do. You have your laptop, iPad, phone, yada, yada, a lot of other devices. Yet another device introducing on another notion and, with new paradigms, pushes it to the limit, for me at least. It just challenges the notions. And I'm not saying this is a disaster, end of the world. For them, right now it is. But besides that, this is a massive meaty UX challenge because you are basically, if you are going to be working on one of these or similar things, God damn it, it would be so difficult from stakeholder perspective to make it right, but also from the user perspective to make it right, of how they would adopt that solution, what they would think of, what their presumptions would be, what their behaviors would be, how you would treat those conflicts when they would arise, because they would. When people don't understand something, what are you going to do with it, or how are you going to incentivize them to adopt it? Anyhow, that's the issues, right? And there's of course a lot more. These buckets are only representative of, again, that person's opinion, but I think we all can think about these things, to think a bit more critically about what the things are. Next two things is going to be a bit more of a deep dive into the two things. I want to show you and maybe refresh the minds or memory of what the actual experience is like, because I'm sure you've seen some of it, but I also am really sure that not everything was seen, or you might have missed things which could be critical to better illustrate it. Do leave your comments, by the way. I'm just taking a break, a comfort break to a sip. Do you think robotics engineers should get more attention and investment, especially considering that while they're advanced in software and AI, there's still a lot of rooms for improvement in hardware? So robotics, I think from 2000, don't quote me on this by the way, but the last time I seen specifically robotics statistics of investment was in 2021, so a good 2 to 3 to 4 years ago. And that was one of the key categories, especially to do with AI. And that's before the generative AI was one of those monikers which everybody adopted and go crazy and drunk for. But I think it still persists. It's just that it's less visible because a lot of the robotics are being focused less on the consumer tech, but more on the actual enterprise or service lines, the nitty gritty behind the scenes workplace sectors and things of that nature. Because let's say if you go, I'm going to give you one of the examples. I worked in retail and specifically online deliveries of groceries. And I cannot give out too much, but there is a lot of companies, at least in UK, which have robotics-based fulfillment centers. And you might have seen Amazon robotics and fulfillment centers. Basically, this is the type of thing where robotics thrive and where a lot of funding went, at least when I looked at those statistics. Same was for farming and logistics and distribution and some other mining, some other sectors, if I recall. Like there's more sectors, obviously. There's 20 or so, probably more than that, where a lot of that funding went and still is going. And I think that persists because, quite frankly, again, because of those UX challenges like this, not to come back and kind of ring that bell again, the consumer technology is very reluctant and very backwards to adopt these things. You can create the next Aibo dog, which is your assistant dog to support and, for mental health, whatever, for consumers to have better interactions with digital things. But it's not the actual sectors which would have the instant adoption because there is lesser need for it. Like the technologies like Rabbit R1 and Humane AI Pin are basically creating something and saying who wants it or who needs it, instead of doing it the other way around. If you look deeper in the nittier, grittier back offices, so to speak, in those industries which are less flashy, that's where the robotics thrive. And if you're interested in that, just look into those. Like look into, again, those construction, mining, logistics, transport, all those different things. That's where the robotics are going to thrive most. And they are already as part of a lot of the services and products. I know that for sure. You just need to look into it deeper, basically. Consumer technology, again, is going to be very different. Sorry to go on a tangent as well, but, it's exciting stuff, isn't it? Okay, let's dive into Rabbit R1. Rabbit R1, the second case, by the way. Again, as I mentioned before, this is Crunch-based data, by the way, but it was founded in 2021, which is, 3 years ago? Time flies, right? But 3 years ago. So it took them probably a bit more, because obviously we likely had proof of concept before we got established, things of that nature, IP, ideas, previous work combined into this. 3 years to get into the market. It's a lot of time, but for hardware, it is nothing. It's literally nothing. It takes a lot of the time to actually publish something new or from scratch. Granted, Teenage Engineering, as an engineering or design firm or consultants, they have a lot of experience in bringing these things. So I likely we used blueprints or templates or boilerplates of what we had to actually create that, ID or industrial design, the actual design engineering for this, simulations and things of that nature. We obviously had some sort of IP behind it before we produced and launched it. The actual LLMs and software obviously took a while, and I think we're still on that journey for obvious reasons, to make it right. But 3 years. They raised money, and again, money matters here a lot, because money puts the wood or paper to the fire, and then you can control it, and that's what happens with these devices, which are half-baked. It's $199 per device, one off, and this is something which I discussed with Dan Saffer on a podcast, on Experience Design podcast. Make sure to check it out, because it's dedicated on design for AI and how he teaches people to design for AI and what matters. And I think one of the things which he highlighted was the actual feasibility of things, but viability more so, because the generative AI models to run on ChatGPT or one of the other generative AI type of services is cheap for you as a user, but it's not cheap to run for the maker. So these are the two, this is the invisible part which nobody thinks about, because to actually sustain that and to tell a person that whenever you want something, you can ask that Rabbit R1 and it's going to use the generative AI model and it's going to use cloud-based interfacing and it's going to exchange the data live, is a big promise and a big bet to take, because someone has to pay for it. If you pay $200, you likely are paying less for the device and software. They basically are going in debt until they can enshitify it, just like, let's say, any other service like Uber was so cheap. Now it is not, because over time they had to get that money back. But that's exactly the same. It's kind of like, what's a good, very primitive example? Consoles, or even phones maybe, but consoles more so. Let's say you get a PC, you get a personal computer which is super fast at a very fractional price compared to an actual laptop or personal computer. You can get it for a few $100 or pounds, and it's going to run anything you want. Obviously, you could argue it could be better, but they make money from other cases. They make money from games, from downloads, from digital downloads. That's how, let's say, PlayStation and Xbox have been thriving today. But they basically are ensuring that there's other models to engage and get paid. With Rabbit R1, it's unclear. One of the things which a lot of the people have been quite interested is like what would be the future cost of it? And you could argue, why would I care if I'm UX designer? You should care a lot, because that's exactly what UX strategy is like. You have to care because people are going to ask it. Like the user who's going to adopt it is going to ask, why is it so cheap? And is it going to be free as they go? Because that's what's going to require a commitment. And a lot of the people are speculating at that too. Again, this is not factual, but we're saying the stated plan is that there will be a store where users can upload the Rabbit AI macros. I have no idea what that means yet, by the way. They create, and then other users will pay to purchase those. So there's some sort of peer-to-peer exchange and marketplace type of mechanics where people gonna buy things from each other. That's great, right? That could be one of the things. Arguably, because it's so expensive to run these things, and designers don't think about this enough, or you must be more strategic to dig into this, to think much more critically. It's a must, because that price doesn't mean anything. It means squat unless you think that your user is gonna abandon it. They're paying for live device they want to use for years to come, especially if you, as part of a business, want for it to succeed and launch more generations, better versions and things of that nature, which strategically everybody would. So this is very big issues, if you ask me. Other things, by the way, I wanted to kind of go through this to show you a few bits of like what the people are actually experiencing with, because I think nothing is as good as the actual demos. Before we jump, there are plenty of signals that suggest Rabbit is trying to go for the printer's model, selling the device at cost until enough users base is locked, then enforce pay for use model. I bet, Kevin, this is exactly what I think. When we talk about enshittification, I think that's exactly the thing. Like they're definitely going in debt and using investor money to launch this and make it, purchasable or consumable for people who don't care enough about this, even as it is. But I think they are going to introduce something because it takes a lot of power to use this. Again, I cannot quantify it, but it's a lot more than $199 and, call it a day. If it's the same logic as saying that Google is free, or Google searches has always been free. They make their money through ads or any other, mechanic, basically. Right. Rabbit R1, the I cannot device.
I cannot check your text messages. I do not provide horoscope readings. I cannot access your calendar on the R1 device.
That was crazy.
I cannot access your calendar on the R1 device. Can I assist with something else? I cannot send emails. I am not able to read the text in the image out loud. I cannot determine the exact length of the reflecting pool, but cannot identify or name any individuals. But I cannot generate audio or speak the text. I cannot determine or state how much the energy drink costs. I cannot open DoorDash on the R1 device. I cannot open YouTube on the R1 device. The screensaver feature is currently unavailable. I do not provide fortune-telling service.
And this is, I kind of need to insert the comment so it doesn't get, taken down. But this could be for a lot of different reasons. It could be connection issues because cloud connection is massive here. It could be time consumption of the ask. It could be that the user didn't set up it right. But again, a big ask of any customer or user, you cannot almost ask this of like, one example which comes into my head, I was reviewing this design tool back in the day on this channel, and I made a very honest review. And the feedback I immediately got by email from the makers of the tool who asked me to make it honest was, this is not how the tool is supposed to work. And this is exactly the expectation for these type of devices where we think we're going to make something, and if the person doesn't want to use it a certain way, or if they're using it a different way or giving some sort of feedback that it doesn't work, it's user problem in a way, which is not the case. This is like a backwards UX approach, which I think this illustrates it perfectly because it's asking way too much for a user who interacts with this.
Services. You are approximately located near Everett, Massachusetts.
Not true.
I'm unable to provide specific directions. I cannot set timers. If you need a reminder, you can save a note in the rabbit hole.
I cannot for the life of me come up with one thing that this does better than your phone.
And that summarizes it pretty damn well. I think, it's hard to say anything else to this. Like, it looks good. It has a lot of form. It doesn't have a function. And you could argue yet, but it doesn't have a function for a long time to come. I think other bits which you might have seen is this thing, which is a lot of themes, but it's ultimately the software of the actual thing is, and it could be compressed or containerized into an app. I know this is a designer just conceptualizing it, but saying this should have been an app, spot on. Like, it could have been an app. It could have been version 1, could have been an app to test with a superb app, and then introducing hardware as a secondary device once the actual hardware can keep up with it and there's enough ability to port it. So a lot of the people actually hacked it and ported that, is just an Android app. And I don't even know if there's merit to play this, but ultimately people can just use their devices to use Rabbit R1.
The height of the tallest building in the world is 2,717 feet.
And in that case, what is the actual point? And I'm asking everyone on the chat, what is the actual point of the hardware if you could actually containerize it and keep it just as a software? I know it's less flashy, it doesn't look as good, it doesn't not gonna get as much attention and perhaps VC money, but from the very practical standpoint and making the right solution, mind-boggling, absolutely. So my opportunities for Rabbit are one specifically, and I know there's a lot more to this, but we don't have whole day. This could have been as a hardware device targeted towards other segments instead of tech for tech or techies for tech or designers who love visuals but not might not be appreciative of actual UX or don't have a critical thinking capabilities. It could have been targeted towards other segments like children, and obviously the customer is still a parent, a grown-up who has the money to spend, but the user is a child. So that type of distribution could have been, and this is shooting from the hip. Maybe they considered that, maybe they pivoted, maybe they changed their minds. That's what I would do. With a very uninformed, very immediate take, I think then it would make a lot of sense, because you could say and you could argue that the actual users would have more forgiveness for this type of interaction experiences and level of experiences and the value of what they would get. The price tag would make much more sense. The data privacy and things of that nature, you would need to snowball and figure out because the parents would care about it a lot. But that would kind of take it into that a bit bigger, broader remit where it would kind of say, okay, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Just obviously the marketing would have to be sorted out right. Redesign the affordances, balance out the focus on the feedback in UX. This is a big one, but with everything, I think it's way too early for a device like that to just have one button and a scroll wheel and a camera which flips. I know it's quirky. There is a lot of merit to making this, to make it look cool and outwardly and innovative, but there is very too few affordances, especially for someone who would adopt it outright. Like, people have to go through so many trials and errors, as evident from those demos, to figure out how to use this, or what we can achieve it and what we absolutely cannot achieve it. What's the spectrum of the range of the actual interactions which would give some sort of feedback. And everything here is focusing on feedback, but not so much of incentives and signals for people to say, this is what you can do with it. It's too early. This is the POC level hardware and engineering, if you ask me, and UX for that matter. Now, Humane AI, but before that, let's see what the chat is cracking up. Let me just take a sip. There are plenty of signals, and sorry if I jump through, there is a lot of comments, by the way, but there are plenty of signals that suggest Rabbit is trying to go for the... Oh, sorry, I covered that. Better UX content design would be to explain why it cannot and how to fix it, if possible at all. Well, I guess in that case, like, how specific do you want us to be? Because you have to then go and do proper research on every single device, like, we have to keep it at this level, at a quite strategic level at that. Like, how to fix it, I think if you would, again, to start with less money, ideally, because the more cash you have from VC, the more mistakes you can make on someone else's dime. But these are the opportunities, what strategically a designer could have influenced with the team, made better decisions ultimately. Obviously not all on them, but this is what your thinking should be as a UXer. The uncertainty of capability is clearly an issue. Let me change the camera. With these devices, which exists also with Alexa, because there is non-disclosure of what is possible and not possible by design from these. Yeah, Kevin, you just summarized, and probably I just talked over your comment. It's exactly that. It's the affordances are invisible. That's why, like, it fails, like, from the get-go. You would need to invest in onboarding, learning, education, hand-holding. Oh my God, like, this device as a consumer tech is a failure because you cannot use it out of the box, basically, or it would take you way too long to figure out on both fronts, on both devices. I think the promise might be deceptive or not mature enough. R1 said it wanted to move on from app-based devices. Yeah, they wanted to, but you have to do it right, Delphine. It's a really good point. Like, you know, the intention is clear. Like, you can't argue with that. We definitely had good vision, but this is vision type. This is not a prototype. Sorry, this is not a product. It's still a prototype of what it could be, at least in my head. It's not market ready. It's not experience ready. It's made as if it's a software project and as if money is endless, and as such we can make more changes. And this is version 0, which they wanna sell basically, and as if they're gonna do countless iterations. But having worked with hardware, which is another spin, hardware is extremely hard, and generations of hardware. If you take this fat pen, amazing pen by the way, I highly recommend it. It's Uni award-winning pen. I had to take it from my wife because it's so awesome. This is innovation on its own, a first generation of pens of something different basically, right? But the hardware for it and to reach the next generation is going to take another year or 2 or 3, because we're going to have to make new molds. We're going to need to make new design choices. We're going to need to test it, take user feedback. Hardware design takes years to get to the next generation. Therefore, Uni is probably going to mold and have the same hardware for the next few years to come. And as such, Rabbit R1, because of this early stage kind of let's just churn it and push something into the market and learn from it, they can only improve on the software end. On the hardware end, people who bought it are going to be stuck. And when I say stuck, it's soft stuck, because they can obviously choose an alternative or leave it be or buy a new one. But hardware design, and this is still UX by the way, because hardware needs UX a lot, and you still can do it. Doesn't matter if you focus on software or product design. Hardware generations take a lot of, and especially because some hardware, like, what could be a good example? Like certain hardware, like automotive, let's say cars, need to be localized. Laptops need to be localized too. Like a lot of the things have to be tailored to the market, and as such, generations take a lot of time. Like there is a lot of changes which need to be considered, and a lot more than just designing another app with agile way and turning something as an MVP and saying, oh, we can just fix it in flight as we learn more. With hardware, as you learn more, means another 2 years until you get to the next generation and can publish the next pen, if that makes sense. I know it's a long-winded response, but that's the reality of it. Okay, let me jump into Humane AI Pin, which is another, again, strategic case study, but Humane AI Pin obviously is slightly different. Way more cash flow, 200 million. I don't know if it's cumulative of through all the seed rounds or if it's the latest seed round, but they got, you know, that Apple background of the founders or engineers, like a lot of buzz within Silicon Valley, within the tech world. Tweeters, like even you and me, if you wrote that this is not going to work, obviously added to the buzz. Like a lot of the signals which basically made it a success outright to generate cash, but not necessarily a success from UX standpoint. The actual company was founded in 2017, 7 years ago. I remember what they did 7 years ago, and I remember working on an AI project. From that perspective, if that's what they incepted with and they started with, God damn it, like they were way ahead of the time. Obviously, results don't match with the vision, just to put it bluntly. But we went from a lot of series, basically the seed round, I don't know what their pre-seed was. They basically raised a crap load of money from a lot of investing firms. So they have a lot of backing. They have a lot of trust from actual people out there. But if you look at the actual responses of how the users worked with it or used it for the day, let's say this is a perfect all credit to Kartik, because you know they basically then went ahead and documented some of this stuff. But the biggest lesson learned, I think, here is that this is what design looks like without a product. Lessons learned. And Kartik followed up, not even design though, because UX is part of design and there is no UX to speak of. And I have to agree. This, to me, reads like either the UXer who was part of the organization kind of got shelled or pushed away into a corner and they weren't effective, or they had no UXers whatsoever, because there's so many, I don't want to say mistakes, but cardinal sins of UX made here, especially when it comes to interacting with the laser device itself. If not for the actual laser projections and interacting with your hand with a limited scope and a certain angle, which requires a lot of ability, even from the fittest of individuals, this would probably be an okay assistant device. But that alone is, that alone is just unfathomable. And Kevin is writing, I bet we had no UX designers. It could have been, or UX designers just weren't listened to, or they weren't empowered enough. Industrial design is top notch, but also very Apple. Let me just zoom in slightly for you. They weighted charging pad to the sounds the device makes. Okay, like all those details, obviously crafted well. And the AI pin, if you even would to, look at it, again, I haven't looked at it, but if you look at the demos, it obviously has a lot of industrial design and design engineering quality in it. But as soon as you turn it on, after 4 hard resets, for me, it all falls off a cliff hard. The laser display is very hard to use. The gestures obscure the screen, and it does not track your hand. It also does not work in the sun. 4 big ones. Obviously, there's more symptoms, more different ways to express these issues. This is big. This has not been designed for. This has been designed in, again, as I mentioned in a beginning of this stream, by engineers who work in isolation for engineers who are going to work in isolation. Someone who, like, in a certain environment. And it's very comical because I can picture in my head someone working in their basement to come up with this. Obviously very fancy, well-funded basement, but something which is not well lit. And someone maybe who is not really actually going to use those laser gestures in real world in a street or in a social situations or somewhere else. A demo. And you can argue the quality of the projections, things of that nature. This specific gesture of using fingers and things of that nature, selections, I have no idea how you would make that precise. You would need to train the user to do certain motions at certain angles. You would need to ask for them for so much. From ergonomics perspective, that's why it's such a big sin. Like, you would need to use this device. Like, I don't know how to even stress this enough. This is just mind-boggling how bad this is. The better, like, I know, more uglier way would be to create another screen, or even ask a user to use a phone, which they can use with their one finger, so they don't stress and develop a carpal syndrome, tunnel syndrome, sorry. Or anything else, because it's asking for them to do motions which are unnatural. And it's inarguable. You cannot challenge that. Did they even test this? Poop emoji. I don't think so. Or they didn't test it enough or in certain environments. That's clear. When you ask what you're looking at, it simply brags about itself. Turns out you need to speak an exact phrase just like Siri. Again, asking for too much of the user. I don't know what else to say. Also, when it does work, it simply says with what ChatGPT would, what API is super interesting, yada. So we cut a lot of corners. Let's see what that is.
What am I looking at?
Let me know if you can hear it, by the way. Yeah, so it's very generic outputs, very generic feedback, basically. Again, looks like a quality device, well designed. The visuals, the form is outstanding. And the nail in the coffin, it makes a smug joke about not being able to teleport you to a location and then instructs you to open the maps on a smartphone. This is it. That's where the limit of affordances is, and that's where you get the feedback from the actual device, which tells you if you want to live, if you want to actually go about, you have to use your actual smartphone device. So it's far off from replacing anything. I mean, it has very sharp constraints and limits to it. And I'm not gonna go, further. Again, credit to this because there's a lot of other good stuff described, but this summarizes the pain points. Again, we could spend a whole day looking at what works, what doesn't, right? I think this still is a top-notch summary. UX, like just imagine what it would look like if it would be done right. Like the design, you would design the right thing and design it right. It would look like night and day. Maybe wouldn't have that same form, but at least it would have a function. And at least, you could sleep at night, because I couldn't. I know we raised a crap load of money, but you have to be fair. That's not what success means. At least not lasting success, because the trust erodes. Like, I would never trust their device again unless we do something paramountly different. And we're so many generations again away from that. Their next device, for it to be desirable, feasible, and viable, would have to be generation 2, and that's going to take them years. And obviously, maybe this was concepted back in 2020 or 2021, and maybe we have a backlog to make something else, but this could have been an app. You could agree with that, right? And I know I hate apps, but this could have been a very simplified solution. Good industrial design, yet the device apparently overheats very often and battery life is really short. Yes, that's another thing. I forgot to even include it, but if you know any more of the things, do post it, because I think they add to this picture. There's way more cons than pros, and I think this is from Verge. They're being obviously quite polite with it, but the good is well-made device. Photos look really pretty good. Look pretty good means that they're okay. Much easier to access than your phone. I mean, for what? That's arguably, again, the spectrum here kicks in. And then the bad is just doesn't work half the time, really slow. Even when it does work, missing way too many basic things. And that really slow is, again, another thing. I don't want to miss it, because that's where the function comes in and kicks in really hard, in their backs. The feasibility on both are lacking. I don't want to repeat what I said about Rabbit R1, but the feasibility here is everything. It's not ready. It's definitely not ready for a market, or stresses what the users would put them in the consumer tech world. The horrific headline, the horrific UI UX design of Humane's AI Pin. So you're paying $700. Could you say fair? I don't know if I could say fair. I wanted to say fair as compared to Rabbit, which are mysteriously going into debt, and they're going to get their money back somewhat. And then $24 a month subscription, so you have to pay to use it. This wearable computer promises to free you from smartphone. There is only one problem: it just doesn't work. So that's the state of it. Like, they're trying to recoup their losses for those 7 years of incepting and making this. But I mean, yeah, this is some top level marketing spiel which doesn't live up to expectations. Let's just put it that way. And Kevin says the price is insulting. I guess because he knows too much, but maybe if you ask a techie who has a lot of dough, so living in Silicon Valley, they're the ones who are buying it. And I don't think it's too much, knowing that you can just bin it and you're not attaching yourself to it. It's not the next iPhone. Clearly, there's that laser limitations. Perhaps the UX and UI designers were trying to push good practice and clash into that tech limitation. So the outcome of this is basically that they laid off 4% of employees, and we didn't have that many. I forget what it was. It was a small team, as far as I'm aware. They have a big pedigree at that, so all respect for this, because they do have good experience. But Kevin mentioned that. I kind of hinted at that. There's a lot of ways which this could have gotten wrong from UX perspective and resourcing. I don't think they have UX designers on board, or again, the UX designers were shunned or put into a corner or asked to do. Well, actually, as I'm saying this, I think what's typical in hardware is also to outsource the UX for industrial designers who might be more keen on hardware interactions than actual software, or in between, like omni interactions. So that could be as well a case where just people didn't have the right skills ultimately who are empowered to do these decisions. Maybe that's the case, but I'm guessing. But yeah, they basically said, this was a flop. And I mean, you didn't have to launch to understand that. But I guess when you spend someone else's money from investment, you kind of have to give a message that it's going to go out. And for opportunities for this, I have no idea. It's too much time spent on it. It's too much money spent on it. And if they're doing layoffs, they're trying to make up the profits or break even, as they're trying to reduce the costs. So they're not in a good state unless we can convince more investors to invest and make this a success. And I don't think the tweeters or people who are on X or tech influencers are gonna support this. And yeah, another thing to mention, by the way, is a lot of the people reviewed this tech, and I've seen a lot of it. It's quite uncommon that people give negative reviews, but universally these two, Rabbit R1 and Humane AI, from consumer tech reviewers who are not really that, they know what good UX is, they just don't know how you achieve it, or how to express it of what good UX is. They all single-handedly reviewed it bad, and it kind of bit them, because a lot of people said, how dare you review bad products in bad words or bad light. Again, I just wanted to mention that. Let me take a quick break. Have a tea. We have just a few bits before we end up summarizing this. Do let me know your thoughts as well, because again, it's really good to exchange the ideas and chat about this. Good industrial design. Yeah, that's from Kevin. On the other side, there is a real and big issue with these devices, and especially the algorithms. Behind that consume a lot of energy, water, and resources. Yeah. So that's a viability standpoint, where I have no idea how Rabbit R1 can promise 199 and the rest is history. Not good for the planet, indeed. Like, from sustainability perspective, this is like ethical notes, right? Like, less about business success. I think, Kevin, you would agree. Like, where maybe us as designers, like quote unquote empaths, we like to empathize. So we tend to see maybe different angles, or we should, from critical thinking perspective. So there's a lesson there. Like, we try to look at these things and see the true impact of decisions, even at the smallest ones. But that's I think the tech space in big tech, or at least Silicon Valley ridden hardware and software, is just a bit detached from that reality or that considerations, I would say. It's just not the right place, and maybe not the right people. Not to talk ill about individuals, I have no idea who they are, but the decisions in the end come out and it shows. Anyhow, this is a funny thing, but I thought, during my brief preparation for a live stream, I saw this conspiracy theory on why Rabbit R1 exists. And maybe it's just gonna humor you. But Jesse Liu knew that Humane, an unproven but exciting product, would likely flop. So he started Rabbit R1 to simply trap those disappointed by Humane but excited about AI, which turns out to be large market. Over 1 million R1 sold, I think. Obviously, this is rough measures. R1 isn't meant to be a product at all. It's simply giant cash cow. I think they made over 100 million profit. This is funny, but it's also not true in a way. Like, you would want this to be true from like drama perspective and end the stream on this, but it's definitely not true, because again, hardware takes a while. Even if it's piggybacked by teenage engineering on other bits, it takes a long time to make those decisions and to form factor it and choose the materials and everything in between, from packaging to creating of the molds, because you create, you press the the deeds, basically the parts, and you assemble it, and there is a lot of logistical involvement. It's a truly global effort to make anything of hardware, even if maybe they outsource production. And as such, if they incorporate again in 2011, if I remember correctly, it took them that long and maybe longer to concept this and make this happen and test it enough so maybe it just doesn't break the buttons. Maybe we even just tested that a person is pressing it a million times and it doesn't break, and maybe they just left it at that. Let's just call it that. But I don't think it's a cash flow. I just like the thinking of the actual people out there, obviously techies, but they think that this has been, again, a cash grab, a cash cow, as some of you said. It's just that Rabbit R1 is so cheap, which I don't think they made a lot of money out of that unless they outsourced. You could probably argue that, hey, it's just an app, so you could have put on any Android basic components, but a lot of them are custom. They look like it. And then the next one is that Rabbit R1 just ate Humane's lunch. I don't know if you could argue that, but the this is funny. Even the website is better. It looks better. It has a screen. The demo was better. Humane is looking more and more like it's been run by pretentious, pompous buffoons hanging onto their ex-Apple coattails. The CEO can't even blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is too personal, but you get my point, where people now use the more recent device, which is still in a bad shape, to say, oh, but this is slightly better. But let's be fair, it doesn't challenge this. It doesn't really challenge the phone. It's not even a companion yet. It doesn't work good as a companion because there is no interaction between the two, minus the feedback, which I think Humane in that demo said, go and look at your phone to look at the maps. It's way too far from it. And you kind of can't pile up and compare one rotten apple with another rotten apple who is just slightly fresher. Okay, lessons learned. So this is a fun bit, but I think it's good to summarize. And I think this is where my thinking is, because with this live stream, I wanted to, one thing, to call out the need for critical thinking, because there wasn't enough, or it was way too constrained in both of those cases. Granted, if they had a UX designer, I think their hands were tied in both of those cases. Or, again, the skills were lacking. Maybe not the right people were empowered to do those decisions. But you can't argue about that, I think. It's just not ready. It's way too early. The market is just not there. The hardware, the software is not there. It's not as cheap just yet. So there's so many variables which are kind of, let's just ship it and then figure it out later, which is such a shame. Lesson one is really that hardware, UX, ID, design engineering is extremely difficult. I stressed it in other live streams and videos already, but having worked close by from where the IDs and design engineers and everyone else is working, like, I understood and learned very quickly of how much time and how complicated the processes are in the actual underbelly. And that's why I think I appreciate how hard it must have been to even create this limited capability tools. But something as a critical thinker in UX, you kind of need to do too. You cannot just take consumer tech and just call it, for the surface level observations and say, oh, it just didn't work because of that. You kind of need to take into account the time frame they spent, the money they had, how they raised it even. That all matters, because it's gonna come down to why they made these poor strategic decisions. Fabian says, ship and think later for the past year seems like a common practice, at least sadly, on my work. I agree, Fabian, but that's, as I mentioned previously, was limited to software, sadly, because that wasn't good either. But now it seems like it's creeping into hardware too. That's why I wanted to kind of pinpoint that the hardware is extremely difficult, because it's not fair what we did. It's not fair for consumers, but also people within the company or anyone else really. It wasted a lot of time and a lot of internet wattage of people talking about this, or me even making this live stream. Like, it's such a waste of time for everyone. You cannot do justice by pushing it and saying we're going to fix it, because again, hardware, this pen version 2 is going to be launched in the next 4 years. I can guarantee it. Critical thinking or lack thereof. Again, I mentioned that. I think there is a bit of that. A lot of the people who were involved obviously didn't think about sustainability or ethics or user experience, ergonomics, human factors, adoption, all the different variables, go-to-market strategy. I mean, you could argue, yeah, they went pretty well, maybe, but I don't know. Next one is vision types versus market-ready products. Both of these are vision types to me. And when I say vision types, is what the experience could look like in the end in 10 years or 5 years. I guarantee we're going to have companion device, not even companion, primary devices like this in our pockets, in our hair, on our sunglasses, on our glasses or watches or stuff like that. We are going to have these, but they're going to work perfect. But we're way too far away from it, ages away from it, because again, it's unsustainable or way too expensive right now. You know, it's just that. So these things, what's been pushed out, are just vision types, vision prototypes. And you could argue it's just version 1. Again, hardware dependency. So version 2 is going to take another few years. But also a general dependency of it being launched as a software instead of being what it is, which is hardware. Innovation with or without human factors and ergonomics, or you could even add any UX consideration. That's a big one. That summarizes all the stream. I don't think I need to repeat myself. And just because we could, should we? Sorry, that bothers me. This is where I think I don't want to talk ill about startups and their fail fast approach, but I think a lot of this is in this case too, because if you know you can raise a lot of cash and you know that in reality you can have a lot of that cash in your pockets for 7 years until you launch something, and you can, you know, you have a salary and you run with it and you have a lot of equity, and you know there is some sort of maybe reckoning at the end of it, you are a winner, or at least it seems like it is. But there's a lot of that kind of like a critical thinking lacking of maybe the founders or entrepreneurs, where you need to step back and say, hold on, is this the right thing? Is this actually going to be pivotal enough to change those things that we set on to do, or what that vision we have? Or is it going to backfire in the end and we're not going to get, you know, where we want to get in the end, basically, which is 7 years later. Humane Pin sold probably a lot and made some money back, but did they make 200 million back? Did they break even? I have no idea. I would doubt it. And again, viability and running costs, it's way too much to run it. That's why it's so slow. If you wanted to make it faster, the devices has to be bulkier. You have to have faster internet speed. You have to have a lot of quantum computing, I guess, on a cloud sitting and doing all that computation for you. It's just simple as that. Like, the UX is lagging on it because it's more about the behaviors than the actual functionality or form we're giving to the user. And then lastly, the cash grab, but at what cost? Because as many of you said, one is super cheap, one is quite expensive or expensive, but has a lot of caveats in that, a lot of question marks, mystery of how they would support this over time, things of that nature, and if people would even desire to do so. That's really that. Let me just see what the latest comments are like. If these two devices are supposed to be both visions, then clearly shipping 1% of that 99 degraded experience is not the right approach. I mean, you could argue both ways, right? I I think people who don't have money or who don't have investor money would choose that 1% approach because they have to do it. If you have all the time in the world, you probably are going to try to push the boundaries and arrive at 50%. But the actual quality of experience probably would be an inverse bell curve. And that's just maybe my shooting from a hip thinking, but it would be kind of like that, where let's say this is your percentage underneath, and the y-axis is your quality of experience. And I think the lesser, because with the lesser you would have adoption, you would have addressing some sort of needs, it would be very clear and fixable and quickly fixable. I would say that you could control the quality at those lesser. However, and the same way, if you could actually achieve that 100% of a vision, the quality would be, you know, it doesn't have to be set, it would be there. But now if you try to attempt to do something in the middle, which is way too complex on hardware and software, and it's not easy to fix, or you don't do enough user testing, you kind of like drop the quality so much that you cannot adopt it, it doesn't do the user need. This is where I think the Humane and Rabbit are living, the two meatballs basically. Again, rough measures and, you know, just shooting from a hip. But you get my thinking, where I think sometimes choosing the low-hanging fruit immediate approach would probably be better from UX perspective purely. Maybe not business sense or them generating cash immediately, but you could argue, even you could parallelize, like make it in parallel, where you would have that immediate 1%er here, but then you could also have the vision which informs that 1%er running alongside and actualizing, producing those experiences. I like the idea of innovating, sorry, and getting people away from screens. Rabbit is not perfect and probably came too early, but again, it's because it doesn't have the attention or the investment. As should, yes, you just said it's much more expensive to invest in hardware. But I would challenge you, Adriana. I think they had a lot of investment, like arguably way less than Humane. But Humane spent a lot of cash, was 200 million, because they were founded so much. Like year by year, they probably arrived at a similar end, basically. I think having 20 million investment is a lot for 3 years. It depends how big is the ask, right? But depends what you want to achieve. For an Android app on a custom hardware though, that's a lot of money. Look at Apple's 1987 Knowledge Navigator. It inspired them to, what is that? Let's look at it. Right, I think I've seen this before. I'm just unsure. It inspires them to research new and innovative ways of bringing that vision over a long... Yeah, I think Kevin, we overlap with our thoughts when I was trying to explain it with the inverse bell curve. I think that's where I was saying, like, you could literally do parallel two efforts, one big vision. And this is really what designers usually is with big ideations. Like, ideally, you would want to define the far end or that long-term vision and then work backwards and define what you can immediately do. But I think they missed the shot. You can't have to agree. You can see at that 1% as the tip of that sword. Cool. I think this is where we need to summarize. There's a lot of good inputs, and I hope you learned something. I hope you can think more critically about this, and I hope, like, when the next solution comes like that, you know, you can kind of like reflect, like, what's in it really? Like, to me, when I first saw, I didn't really even need to go into the demos of the actual things. When I first saw the device, I immediately seen so many issues with UX, so many challenges, not even issues. Like if I would have to work on this, my head would explode. I would need like the biggest UX team to do it right, and the biggest engineering and data science team to do it right from feasibility, viability perspective. Like there is so much to make this right. Like I would never trust a startup to get this right out of the door. Apple, fair enough, they would do it. But even with Apple, please, you have to agree with me on this. Even with Apple, when they launch something new like spatial experiences, there are so many issues still, and they have trillions. They have an unsurmountable amount of money to spend, basically. They have the biggest teams, the most skilled talent, and they still can get the things 100% right. So what can you expect of a startup who has like, let's say 20 or 200 people to do the same, with lesser cash and lesser timeframes? You can't expect it to happen. So yeah, I invite you to do the same. And I'm sure a lot of you, most of you already did that when you saw it. You've seen the facade. You saw that, okay, this is so exciting. The design is amazeballs. Like you can't argue with that. It's a candy, eye candy. But immediately your mind should be thinking, I need to find out more. Is it actually as good? Is it actually has the legs? Critically think through those things, because that's how you make better UX decisions yourself when the time comes. But yeah, that's about it. I thank you so much for joining the live stream. I have another live stream to be scheduled shortly. Again, time is limited, but I hope you enjoyed this. I really appreciate you being on a live stream and chatting with me and contributing and listening and your time. But have a great weekend, and until next time.